Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The White Flag, a podcast about slowing down, learning how to get still, and adopting a posture of surrender with Jesus as we have to actively navigate our increasingly hurried, manic, and control-obsessed world. I'm your host, Jonathan Moynihan, coming to you from right outside of Baltimore, Maryland. And as always, before we get started, I would love for you to rate and review the show. If you are on Apple or Spotify, you can go ahead and do that now. If you're one of like the 3% of people who consume this on YouTube, you can go ahead and like and subscribe and do all that dumb stuff you have to do on YouTube. But I want to give a quick special shout out to Patricia from California, Luke from Frederick, to Lisa from Maryland, and Teresa from Washington, D.C. That was kind of fun, Talisa and Teresa. I want to give a shout out to you four specifically for reaching out to me and hitting me up in the last couple months. It was great getting to hear how God is at work, what He's actively doing in your life to help you grow and just dive deeper into a relationship of prayer and presence with God. It makes me so encouraged and so excited to see people growing in these ways. If God is at work in your life and helping you put down the pace and volume of culture and just get into a quieter rhythm with Jesus, I'd love to hear about it. You can reach me at my website, jonathanmoynihan.com, or as always, you can slide into DMs on Instagram and hit me up at jonathan.moynihan. I would always love to hear from you, so please reach out if there's something cool going on with you or any part of this platform has been beneficial for you. Now, diving into our episode today, I want to ask you, have you ever gotten a moment to sit down, maybe you've had some downtime, and obviously we no longer know what it is to be bored anymore because of our phones, but have you ever sat down, taken a rest, or had some downtime, and whipped out your phone and started scrolling on your preferred method of, quote, connecting with other people? So you're on Twitter, you're on Instagram, you're on Facebook, TikTok, Reddit, news app, sports page, whatever it is. But have you ever sat down in a moment of rest, and within a short period of time, you stumble upon an opinion or an article or a person that just triggers a strong emotional response from you? You sit down to rest a little bit, but then quickly you find yourself having this emotional response of anger or fear, insecurity, or just confusion or bitterness or whatever. Have you ever happened to you? That's happened to us, my wife and I. My wife and I were just talking about that the other day. She had a night alone. I was out with some friends, and she'd been taking care of the 3 kids all day. And so I was like, babe, I really want you to go to bed at a good time and just get some long sleep. Our son is sleeping through the night right now, and I just wanted her to get some rest. And she's like, yeah, I'm going to go to bed at a good time. It'll be great. So I come home at like 11:30, which is pretty late for me. And I come up to our bedroom, and my wife is like, clearly hasn't been asleep that long. And I'm like, hey, are you awake? And she goes, yeah, I didn't go to bed till recently. I'm like, oh, why not? And she told me this story of how she was scrolling on her phone, like while she was getting ready for bed. And she came across like an old relationship, an old friend, not like ex-boyfriend or anything, but just like a person she knew, who was posting some things that it was a significant deviation from where she thought this person was spiritually. And then like in the comments, there's like all these people like affirming with that person or disagreeing in a really poor way. And it almost made her like really insecure about her not following up with this person and not knowing much about them and feeling like she was inadequate if that question came up in ministry. And, we're kind of leaders, we're trying to help people. And so it spiraled her down into like this really significant negative space. And she's sitting there like laying in bed trying to go to sleep, but she's invited this voice and all of this energy into her life through, her digital life basically by scrolling on social media. And she was telling me that story, and I can totally relate to that. So we got into a really good long conversation. I think it was more so the next day we talked about it. We didn't stay up till 1 a.m. or anything. But as we processed about this the next day, we both realized that there are a couple tensions we have to navigate in our digital life that we think most people aren't very intentional about, ourselves included. Because we realized almost nowhere in like real human life are you actually exposed to the sheer number of opinions that you get exposed to in your digital existence. And on top of that, nowhere in your real life do you allow the opinions of people that you kind of keep on the periphery. Nowhere do you allow the opinions of those people into your life, especially into the most intimate spaces of your life. And I say intimate because when it comes to our digital lives, we oftentimes sit there letting messaging and opinions and voices of other people hit us while we are in the most intimate spaces in our home, like while we lay in our beds, or while we sit in our bathrooms, or when we take a break from work and we finally have a moment to rest, or when you finally get an hour away from your kids while they watch Moana for the 19th time. Like, these are very intimate spaces of life that we then invite a massive amount of people into digitally, or we allow voices that we would never allow into those spaces otherwise, and yet they still get to us because of our digital platforms. And as we talked about this more, we realized that the opinions that we allow into our lives, they're not inherently bad to get exposed to those opinions. But the problem is when those opinions start invading your spirit or your psyche in moments when you aren't really prepared for it, or you're not really interested in talking about it at that time, or you're not even alert to the fact that that opinion or that position or that energy is going to get into your psyche. And so what happens is over time, you have these like quiet, restful moments or times when you want to break or in an intimate space in your own home. These voices and the opinions or just the news comes crashing into your life. And then you start reading the comments, you get sucked into a combative dialogue, or then you start second-guessing your ability to answer that question, or then you think about all the other ways that you would try to navigate that problem, or what you think you should do, or what you think other people should do. And then before you know it, you're second-guessing yourself. You've got all this energy, you've got all this doubt, you've got all this insecurity swirling up within you, or just a lot of energy going on. And a lot of it has nothing to do with you, but now you've been exposed to it because of the sheer number of people and the volume of the voices. And so we just talked about that being our reality. And I realized that my wife deals with this, I deal with this, I don't think I'm the only one. And so I just wanted to take a moment to talk about it. Now, there are a few problems that arise when we get honest about the fact we've all been in this position, where we are scrolling carelessly and then we stumble upon something that triggers a strong emotional response from us, and then we have no way of grounding it because that voice is now in our head or in our home, or just it's disrupted our time of rest. But there are a few problems with this that we have to call out that impact us from a psychological standpoint and a spiritual standpoint. The first big problem is that for most of us, our digital lives have exceeded our psychological limitations, meaning our connectedness to the opinions and events and lives of other people have actually stretched us so thin psychologically and relationally that we are now exposed to an amount of people and an amount of information that we simply can't keep up with anatomically. In 1993, the British anthropologist Robin Dunbar famously did a study concluding that most humans can't maintain more than 150 real relationships, not like social media relationships, real relationships. And he went into great detail on this. You can look it up later. There have even been some studies at Stanford that try to push back at it, but then when people look at the study itself, it's flawed and not as cohesive or just constructed as well as the original study by Dunbar. So his theory really does stand up. But he evaluated in 1993 the neurological limitations and the psychological limitations that concluded, basically in his final statement, that he thinks we can navigate, on average, about 150 genuine, healthy connections with other people. The problem with this is we obviously now, in 2022, live in a context where there's this implicit pressure to triple or quadruple that number, primarily through digital technology. And I know people who follow thousands and thousands of people, meaning there are thousands of voices and messages and opinions poking and prodding and pulling at their psyche all over the place. And that's per platform. So really, you're looking at maybe a multiplication of 10 beyond those 150 connections we actually can maintain because we're strewn about 3 or 4 different platforms at a time. And so the first big problem with our digital lives really is that casually over time, there's like this small splinter that forms and inevitably gets worse and worse as our digital existence has exceeded our psychological and relational capacities. And this stirs up within us a whole bunch of things like anxiety and restlessness and aimlessness and noise in our spirit. So that's the first big problem that happens. The second one that occurs is that for many of us, not just the number of voices we get exposed to is a problem, but the quality of those voices themselves is a problem. Because the voices that we allow into our lives digitally are often there not by design, but by default. Like there are times When you genuinely want to expose yourself to people who have different political opinions than you, or theological positions, or different ideological frameworks, or they have different lived experiences, and you should expose yourself to those things. Those are all good things. That's to be celebrated. The problem is, because we haven't designed a digital life and built a framework for ourselves of how to grow as humans who are both deeply like physical beings and digital now in this new world, the problem is we aren't intentional when we design this digital life. And so as we expose ourselves to competing views and opinions and even spiritual interpretations, we're not intentional about when we will or not expose ourselves to those things. And so it's constantly swirling around us all the time. So what happens is you're scrolling on social media, just like my wife, before bed, which strike one, you shouldn't be doing that, even though I myself do that from time to time. You shouldn't be scrolling on your phone before bed. But let's say you're doing that. And then suddenly you see an old friend who posts something that seems completely out of character for them, or it's a massive deviation from where you thought they were spiritually. And then there's a ton of people commenting to your surprise, and they're kind of agreeing with this, which even worries you a little bit. And so now you're dumping all this emotional and relational energy into your spirit and your psyche as you're watching this, all while you should be sipping your sleepy time tea and enjoying a little bit of honey while you read a book before you get to bed so you can wake up refreshed and bring your best self to God and to your job and to your kids the next day. All of that is now in jeopardy because you're living a digital life by default instead of by design. And again, I don't think our response is to just withdraw completely from the digital world and digital conversations and block out everyone who disagrees with you. But the big question of this episode is, has your digital life been created by design or by default? Has your digital life, is it there in place by design or by default? I think for many of us, we've lived a reactive digital life based on the slow and steady encroachment of tech, and it's impacting our emotional and spiritual lives more than we care to admit. Me too, I'm included in this. And I'm not encouraging you to double down on the echo chambers where you only follow or only connect with people who absolutely agree with you on everything. I'm not saying that. Instead, what I want to champion is this idea of being thoughtful and contemplative about the ways in which we engage one of the most significant social arenas of our lives. That is the digital arena, because even in that space, we are called to be followers of Jesus and representatives of the kingdom. So the question behind this question, is your digital life by design or by default? The real question here, the why behind this whole episode is, what changes do you need to make in your digital life that can better serve the follower of Jesus you're trying to become? What changes do you need to make in your digital life that can better serve the follower of Jesus you're trying to become? The verse that really resonated with me as I thought about this more and processed this conversation with my wife came from Jesus' brother in the book of James. Because in the book of James, chapter 1, verse 19, he writes, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this," aka, y'all better listen up. He says, "Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." So Jesus' own brother couldn't be closer to the source of all holiness, all righteousness, all truth. Jesus' own brother says, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. And the thing is, I don't know if I can think of an area of modern life that is more the opposite of what James is talking about here than the digital sphere. Because like our digital lives, social media platforms, are where we get conditioned to be slow to listen, quick to speak, and where we get conditioned to get immediately angry. I mean, the algorithms are based on stirring up anger because that's a stronger emotional response that's going to make us get more addicted, come back to the platform more and more. And so Jesus' brother says, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. Social media conditions us to be slow to listen, quick to speak, and quick to get angry. And just because of this paradigm, we have to evaluate, we have to ask the question, what changes do I need to make in my digital life so that I can become more like a person who is slow to speak, quick to listen, and slow to get angry? Here's how the late, great Eugene Peterson paraphrased this passage. Just take a moment wherever you are. This is so good. Just let it hit you, whether you're driving or going for a walk or listening while you sip coffee or while you're, working somewhere else where you're able to be distracted clearly because you're listening to the podcast. But listen to how Eugene Peterson paraphrases this passage from James. He paraphrases it by saying, "Dear friends, lead with your ears, follow up with your tongue, and let anger straggle along in the rear. God's righteousness doesn't grow from human anger. So throw all spoiled virtue and cancerous evil in the garbage. In simple humility, let our gardener God landscape you with the word, making a salvation garden of your life." Listen, I'm not a gardener. I don't have a green thumb. My wife and I have a mint plant and a cilantro plant that I'm pretty sure we've killed a few times over. But I know when you want to grow something healthy, you've got to pull out some weeds. So again, another way of phrasing this question: what are the weeds you need to pull out of your digital life? What weeds do you need to pull out of your digital life so that you can step into the Jesus follower you're trying to become? From a real practical standpoint, who do you need to unfollow because your only reason for following them is rooted in spite or bitterness or judgment or just enjoying the echo chamber that it almost fuels you to stay within? What boundaries do you need to put in place so that when you take a moment to rest and have a break, you actually rest and have a break instead of jumping into the metaverse of Reddit and TikTok and Instagram? Think about this. What app elicits anger or anxiety within you the most? Do you need to take a 10-day break from it just to see how it benefits your mental health? A friend of mine, shout out Matt Scruggs, he told me about this app called App Block that only allows him on certain apps after he's been on other ones. So he sets it up so that he can't access social media apps until he finishes certain apps like related to fitness or Bible time. Think of it this way. Who are the voices that you allow into your life through digital platforms that stir up insecurity and anxiety within you that you would actually never tolerate in your physical world? I don't know if you're anything like me, but I don't need voices to keep me from getting overly confident. My own insecurities and negative self-talk do a great job of doing that. I don't need voices on social media to keep me humble. I've got friends who hold me accountable. I've got people that keep me humble. I don't need a digital life that fuels insecurity and negativity. So maybe you're like me and you need to unplug, at least for a season, from certain voices in your life so you can walk more confidently in who Jesus is calling you to become. Who are the voices or the accounts or the news pages that are most likely to set you off in a way that makes you live antithetically to the scripture James says of being slow to speak, quick to listen, and slow to get angry? Is your digital life there by design or by default? So here's the thing. Maybe this whole episode is just for me and my wife, and I'm just ranting about our own problems and nobody else can relate. But I don't think that's the case. I know that some of you want to avoid echo chambers just like me. I know some of you want to expose yourself to people you disagree with so you can get stretched, just like me. I know some of you have family and friends who you really can only keep in touch with through social media, just like me. I get it. But I am suspicious that even the most faithful follower of Jesus, someone who prays 2 hours a day and reads 5 chapters of the Bible every morning, even they are likely, because of our world, spending 3 or 4 times more of their day on their smartphones than they are in Scripture, just because of the nature of our modern world. And so even if the most committed, disciplined follower of Jesus is having a 2, 3, 4 times over relationship between Scripture and smartphones, we have to realize that our digital life is a primary method in which we are being conformed to the patterns of this world instead of being transformed by the renewing of our minds. And so we have to ask, what changes need to happen in our digital life so that our digital life is there by design and not by default? Maybe you're very, very shrewd and you're not on social and you're very particular about who you allow into your life or not. That's great. Maybe you only need to consider the amount of noise that the digital life brings you right now because the amount of voices and the voices themselves are all solid. But here's the last thing I want us to consider. Romans 12:2, becoming one of my all-time favorite verses, says, "Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by the changing the way you think." It says, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Now let's hold that verse And let's hold it in contrast with one of the founders of social media, Jaron Lanier. Here's what he says after since no longer being in the social media game. He says, social media is continuous behavior modification on a mass basis, with everyone under surveillance by their devices, receiving calculated stimulus to modify them. It's a bad religion. It's a nerdy, empty, sterile, ugly, useless religion that's based on false ideas. And when you hold that from one of the individuals who is at the creation of this digital life, and you contrast that with the call of Paul in the book of Romans to not be conformed by the world, but transformed by God, the hard truth is we are being conformed by the world every time we pick up our digital devices. Every time we step into the digital landscape, we are being shaped and molded and modified en masse by those algorithms and by those platforms. And so as followers of Jesus, we must index our hearts and our schedules and our practices so that the inevitability of a digital life and what we experience every day is by design and not by default. Because if it is by default, we will become more like the world and less like the follower of Jesus that Christ wants us to be, where we are quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. So right now, today, here's your homework. What are you feeling in your gut that you need to do to make sure your digital life is by design? What is that thing within you that you're almost afraid to acknowledge to yourself because you know it's going to be hard, but it's going to help make sure that you are being transformed by the renewing of your mind instead of being conformed by the patterns of the world through digital technology? I'm going to give you 30 seconds right now just to think about that. And then I'll pray, and my challenge to you is go do that thing. Take a step this week so that you get one step closer to having a digital life that is by design. God, part of this episode is birthed from me feeling anxious and restless and unhappy in my own digital life. Of, downloading Instagram again after going a whole 35 days without it, and then slowly letting the temptation of the dopamine of social media creep back into my life, God. So I know part of this is a lot of this is about me. But would you help us take a step, then make sure that we are doing what we need to do to walk in step with who you want us to become, and help us live in such a way that our digital lives, where we are still your representatives, not hiding behind an avatar, but being our real selves, so that our digital lives are by design and not by default, so we can bring you glory, we can walk with you, we can grow with you. Yeah, you just help us make a difference in the world. Help us do that today, Jesus. In your name I pray. Amen.